Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. Mr. Johnson teaches Macbeth, the context of the witches. With this video, what I want to do is sort of set the witches into a bit of a setting of historical information for you, and just try and make it clear really why they are so important to the play, because our modern understanding of witches is going to be very different to somebody who was watching the play back in 1606 when it was first being staged. Therefore, it's really important that you have some understanding of the context as well. So be ready with pen and paper as you watch this video. As interesting as it would be to watch it all the way through not doing anything, it's really important that you are actively listening, and by that I mean writing down notes, pausing the screen once you've heard some information and writing down the things you hear. You're much more likely therefore to remember that information later, and also then you can add it to your notes and keep yourselves organised. So without further ado then, let's move on. This links to AO3 context, which is what I've put up here, and I've asked you, well, with that, what do you need to do? The answer is in the yellow box. You, when you're writing your response to a Macbeth question, you need to show an understanding of how the time and the events of 1606 affect how the audience viewed it. Because as I said a minute ago, how you watch it as a person in the years, the 2020s, is going to be very different to somebody who was watching it 400 years ago. And therefore, having a bit of background information is important. The exam board do not want you to write a historical essay of any sort, but what you can do, and the highest marks often are achieved by students who can actually sort of weave some of that information alongside it. And you'll see a little bit of that as we go through the video. And that is a picture of the Globe Theatre, in case you were wondering. That's the recreation, but it would have been something very much like that where Macbeth was first performed over 400 years ago. So, I want to try and set this into a little bit of a scene. Try and picture this. You are somebody living 400 years ago, perhaps in a village very much like this one. It could be the case. But you need to have it in your head that these are superstitious people in the audience. They don't have the understanding of science that you have. While we find it very easy to explain all sorts of natural events through science and our knowledge of it, they didn't have that. Therefore, they were superstitious. They were sort of superstitions, and ideas grew up around why things were happening. And often, I put there, your explanation of events would have been through unseen powers. There would be evil operating. It could have been God. Rainbows, the idea of a rainbow being a sign from God that everything's going to be fine, whereas storms, particularly thunder and lightning, often had very genuine evil associations. So you need to picture it that these are a fearful people. They can't explain things in the way that you can. So things like I've put there, the weather, like storms, great storms, maybe were seen as a punishment from God, but also things like eclipses, solar eclipses, was seen as like a really worrying sign that things weren't good. But at the same time, when there was famine, so when people weren't able to be fed properly, when the crops failed because of the weather or for whatever, or even not for the weather, people would blame these things on the supernatural, that maybe somebody had done something or said something which had upset the forces of nature, and that's why they were being punished. And diseases were seen in the same way as well. When the great plagues came round, they were often sort of explained away as being a punishment for something that somebody maybe had said or done. So you need to sort of just have that in your head as you watch this, and also watch the play. But also, you need to realise that you, if you were an audience member then, you would have feared that the devil walked the earth and his agents were all around you. It wasn't just the devil, one thing walking around, but his like minions. And it says agents is a good word because that gets used in the play. The people who are supporting and helping the devil, they're all around you. Witches were some of the most obvious forms of this as well. And you couldn't just tell a witch because they had a pointy hat and a broomstick. That's sort of a more modern idea of a witch, whereas people believe witches were all around them. Some people claimed to be witches and were punished. Others sort of kept this hidden, and others, of course, were not witches, but nevertheless got punished, as you shall see shortly. So just wanted to show you that as a piece of artwork as well, a bit of medieval artwork. The idea, the belief of the devil, it really was a terrifying thing to have a belief that this agent, this evil, walked amongst you, and those who helped, supported, and were agents of the devil were there. And just interesting to point out as well, the snake imagery going on there as well, because snakes certainly appear a lot in the play. So let's have some common beliefs about witches. Once again, be ready to write things down here as well. Certainly number one I've put there, they believe that they had supernatural powers, the ability to sort of control the world around them in some way more than us humans. So not just natural, supernatural, which is why that word is used. The belief that they created horrible spells using horrible ingredients. There's a great couple scenes in the play where they sort of use eye of frog and bits of newt and lizard and sort of cut off bits of people who've been hung for their crimes. They really use some horrible ingredients. There's also this belief that they could create curses on people who upset them. We see that in the play in Act 1 Scene 3. The witches are there creating a curse on somebody who's upset them. They believed that, people believed that they kept pets, certain types of pet, like frogs and toads and cats particularly, were seen as sorts of animals that witches would keep. And also their appearance, believed that they maybe have warts and sort of disfigurements that made them look particularly ugly. But also birthmarks were sometimes seen as signs of evil. Deformities, sort of maybe an extra finger, or sort of the way when someone is born and there's something not quite right with them, that deformity was believed maybe to be a sign of the devil. So unfortunately, if you had one of those things, and people do, at this time it certainly was seen to be held against you. So that's some common beliefs about them. Once again, make sure you pause in this video and writing down your own notes here, because all of this is building up the picture of the witches who we then see in Macbeth. The punishments are very much worth knowing about with witches. They were just horrible and dreadful. Mankind is very good at creating very painful punishments for itself. Absolute painful torture. I won't go into detail now. If you're really interested, you could find out yourself. There are all sorts of horrible things, from thumb screws to much, much worse. Having your nails torn out was certainly something they enjoyed doing as well. Ducking stools, which is what you see here, and used until they maybe confessed or certainly nearly drowned, or some cases did drown as well. So they were literally ducked into a river. Or a lake perhaps. Burning at the stake was a very common one as well. Quite literally, people would be tied up to a big wooden pole, a fire created around them, and they would be burned alive. And these were just some of the punishments that mankind created for those who were accused of being witches. So let's make some links to Macbeth then, because it's no good just having a historical knowledge. As I've put there, the witches are like the fates from Greek mythology. They were sort of believed to be able to tell the future, which is why the word fate is used there. They were called the fates. That's something which is maybe sort of pushing towards the higher marks there. You can do a little bit of research yourself if you're interested there. But also think about the witches. The play acts as a warning of what happens to those who may listen to the devil's agents. That's something that's really important here. Macbeth pays attention to and follows the witches' advice to him and believes in what they say, and therefore look what happens to Macbeth. Banquo does not listen, and although he is murdered by Macbeth, his children still go on to have kingship and are great people. So therefore there's a real difference here between what Macbeth does and what Banquo does. So therefore, if I want to really re-emphasise that, the point of the play shows you what will happen if you listen to the witches and listen to those who are evil, and that the fact that there are consequences if you are to do that. Also, the final bullet point, just wanted to point out, they are referred to by Banquo as the instruments of darkness. And I think that's just a really nice way of remembering them as well. They are, darkness being like the devil and hell, they are instruments. They are used by hell and the devil in order to be able to do things on earth. And like they cast spells and curses. So that's the point of the witches. They sort of send out a warning. Shakespeare uses them to send out a warning of what will happen to those who listen to them. Just extra notes here as well coming up for you to really push yourself on and try and gain some of the highest marks. Having this knowledge and understanding is really important. So James I is the king at the time that the play is the play is performed first. And just extra information, when he was sailing back from Denmark, which is several hundred miles across the North Sea, he'd been there and he'd married his wife, his Danish wife. They had to shelter from terrible storms for many, many weeks. When they got back, they set up witch trials because they believed these storms were created by witches who wanted to basically kill the king and kill his wife. They set up these witch trials. This is in the north of England. many people confessed to meeting the devil, but only after they'd had some horrific torture and punishments as well. And honestly, if you were going through these tortures, you'd probably admit to anything yourself. But nevertheless, the witch trials were taking place. Many confessed to meeting the devil, others confessed to being witches, and others confessed to cursing the king and his wife as well. Some of those confessions were actually done to the king, which is really important because Shakespeare is writing Macbeth in order to interest the king. If the king is interested in his plays, money will follow for Shakespeare. So therefore, knowing that the king takes an interest in witch trials and witchcraft is why you can perhaps see the witches in the play. And that's a link that you could make when writing an answer about Macbeth. It's also worth noting, my final bullet point, King James wrote this book. It was called Demonology. It's 1597 this, and basically it was a book which had many parts to it, but it was exploring the dangers of the supernatural, and also he sort of approves the idea of witch hunting in there as well. So it just gives you an idea that the king at this time was interested in witches and witchcraft. He absolutely hated them and was appalled by them, of course, because he believed they had tried to sink his ship and kill him, and many other bad things as well. So some key questions which are really important to have a go at now. So pause in this slide so you can write down your answers. All of these answers can be found in the video. If you don't know the answer, go back and rewatch that section. I'll let you read those to yourself, but as I say, those should all be very answerable when you have done the video in full. I believe that's my last slide. Yes, it is. So I want to say thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. Check out some of my other videos as well to do with Macbeth, and above all, use information like you have found here. It's all about students finding ways to try and build this information into their answers. If you're writing about Macbeth and writing about how power hungry he is, then you could talk about how witches were seen to be agents of the devil, and actually by having Macbeth follow those witches' predictions, he is giving into evil and therefore is punished. And you could say Shakespeare is showing us what happens to those who are led by evil, such as witches. And that's the sorts of ideas you want to try and build in. So ideas from this video. So I'm going to end it there. I want to say one more time, thank you very much for listening to this video all the way through, and good luck. Goodbye.